In the timeline of a missing person case, there is a concept investigators call the fatal interval. It is the precise moment where routine bleeds into tragedy, where a life is diverted from its natural path by a force that no one saw coming. We like to believe that safety is a collective effort, that in a crowd of hundreds, a predator cannot operate unseen. We assume that witnesses, lights, and noise are deterrents. But in late summer 1993, in a small Texas town, that assumption was dismantled in less than 10 minutes. A 7-year-old girl named Laya May Harrove stood in the middle of a lit fairground, surrounded by neighbors, illuminated by floodlights, and waiting for a ride. And in the time it took to buy a snow cone or play a round of ring toss, she ceased to exist in the world her parents knew. This wasn't a case of a child wandering into the woods. This was an extraction, precise, silent, and terrifyingly fast. This is the story of the minutes that changed everything. This is Signal 49. To understand how a child vanishes in plain sight, you first have to understand the environment. The evening of the disappearance was defined by a suffocating physical heat. It was 1993, late summer in Texas. The humidity was the kind that soaked through cotton shirts and made the air feel heavy, clinging to everything it touched, even after the sun dipped below the horizon. The setting was the county fairgrounds, a patch of dirt and dry grass usually reserved for cattle auctions and farm equipment expos. But on this night, the desolate plot had been transformed. It was alive. Generator-powered floodlights flickered over rusted rides, casting long, shifting shadows. Music from worn-out speakers crackled in the humidity, alternating between static and country songs. It was a chaotic ecosystem of noise and motion. Children ran in loose, feral packs, kicking up dust, while parents followed at a distance. And that distance is key. It was a distance that felt safe in 1993, in a town where the social contract was simple. Everyone knows everyone, strategists note. Psychologically, this environment is a predator's paradise. The sensory overload, the lights, the screaming children, the music, creates a form of blindness. People see, but they don't observe. Laya May Harrove was 7 years old. She was small for her age, with dark hair pulled back into uneven pigtails, a detail that would later be seared into the memory of every volunteer in the county. She had a habit of gripping things too tightly when she was excited, a physical manifestation of her energy. That night, she was wearing a light blue dress. Her mother had ironed it that afternoon, fretting that it would get dirty before the sun even went down. Laya, of course, didn't care about the dress. Her focus was entirely on a single object, a paper ticket folded in her hand. She had creased it so many times, it had become as soft as cloth. It was her currency for the night, saved specifically for the pony ride near the livestock barns. Her older cousin, a boy on the cusp of his teenage years, had promised to take her. The deal was simple. He would finish his turn at the ring toss, and then they would go. The barns were situated at the far edge of the fairgrounds, pushed past the aromatic haze of the food trucks and the mechanical roar of the midway. It was a quieter zone, smelling of hay, manure, and warm animals. It wasn't unusual for kids to loiter there. Parents leaned against fences, trading gossip. Teenagers drifted in and out. Laya stood near a wooden rail, swinging her feet, scanning the crowd. She was visible. A woman selling lemonade noticed the blue dress. A man leaning against a trailer saw her humming to herself. To everyone watching, she was just a child waiting. There was nothing strange about it. Until there was. Time in a missing child case is measured in agonizing increments. 5 minutes, maybe 10. That was the window, when her cousin finally navigated back through the crowd. Flush from the ring toss, Laya wasn't at the rail. At first, the reaction wasn't panic, it was annoyance. Logic dictated that she had grown impatient. He assumed she had gone to find her parents, or wandered back toward the lights of the rides. He walked the short distance between the barns and the midway, scanning faces. He called her name. Once, then again. He checked the pony ride, the snow cone stand, the game booths. Laya didn't answer. He felt a flicker of worry, a small knot forming in his gut, but he pushed it down. Kids get distracted. That's what kids do. But the moment he reached Laya's parents and spoke the words, "I can't find her," the atmosphere shattered. Her mother stopped smiling mid-sentence. Her father set down the drink he'd been holding, a motion he wouldn't even remember making later. The casual energy of the night evaporated. They split up immediately, moving fast, their voices rising over the carnival noise. "Laya! Laya!" Other families, sensing the shift in tone, joined in. The search radius expanded instantly. Someone checked the bathrooms. Someone else ran toward the parking area. But the fair kept running around them. The music played, the lights flashed. Laughter cut through the air, creating a horrific dissonance with the rising fear of the parents. Within 15 minutes, the whisper network of the small town had done what the PA system couldn't. The word spread, "A child is missing." Volunteers began blocking paths with their bodies, stopping strangers, asking if they'd seen a girl in blue. The fair's announcer finally made a broadcast, but it was jumbled, the description vague and swallowed by the static. The mood of the fair turned. Laughter thinned. Conversations dropped into whispers. Parents instinctively pulled their own children closer, tightening their grip. A deputy sheriff arrived while the fair was technically still open. He found Laya's parents near the main gate. He tried to keep his voice calm, asking the routine questions that feel like insults in the moment. What time was she last seen? What was she wearing? Did she wander often? They answered, but the questions felt wrong. Laya didn't wander. Another deputy radioed for backup, but here is where the timeline worked against them. By the time the decision was made to close the exits, the perimeter was already compromised. Cars were leaving, horse trailers were being hitched up and driven away. The crowd was thinning in a way that could never be reversed. The fairgrounds became a landscape of confusion. Deputies swept through with flashlights, cutting beams of light under bleachers, behind trailers, inside animal pens. Volunteers formed loose skirmish lines, walking the perimeter, calling Laya's name into the dark fields beyond the carnival lights. There were no signs of a struggle, no torn fabric, no dropped shoe. The ground had been trampled by thousands of boots, rendering the soil a useless mess of overlapping footprints. Witnesses came forward, but memory is a fragile thing under stress. Someone thought they saw her near the food trucks. Someone else believed she was crying near the barns. Another insisted she was holding hands with an older woman. None of the stories matched. None could be confirmed. Laya's mother remained anchored near the barns, refusing to leave the last spot her daughter had been seen. Her father was in constant motion, pacing between deputies, asking the same question over and over. How does she just disappear? The fairgrounds weren't that big. There were no dense woods nearby, no deep water to hide a child so quickly. And yet, she was gone. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped, but the tension thickened. The Texas Rangers were notified. More patrol cars arrived, washing the dirt in rhythmic red and blue light. The rides were shut down one by one, leaving only the hum of generators to fill the silence. Families were sent home. Those who stayed did so with grim purpose, searching ditches, checking culverts, shining lights under abandoned farm equipment. Around midnight, the K9 units arrived. The handlers asked for a scent article. Laya's mother, hands shaking so badly she had to sit on the ground, handed over a small sweater from the car. The dogs picked up the trail near the livestock barns almost immediately. With noses low and tails stiff, they pulled their handlers forward. For a brief moment, hope surged. The trail led away from the fairgrounds, straight toward a gravel road that ran along the property line. The dogs moved with confidence, tracking a direct path, and then, at the edge of the road, they stopped. The dogs circled, confused. They sat down. The scent was gone. Deputies stared at the ground, then at the empty road, then at each other. The implication hung heavy in the humid air. The scent didn't fade. It vanished. This confirmed the darkest theory investigators had. Laya hadn't wandered off into the fields. She hadn't gotten lost. The trail ended at the road because she had been lifted from the ground. If Laya had been taken, it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and it was terrifyingly fast. The search continued anyway, because stopping felt impossible. Somewhere near the fence line, a volunteer noticed a red balloon tied loosely to a post. It bobbed gently in the night breeze, its ribbon frayed. No one could say how long it had been there. Balloons were everywhere at the fair, but no one claimed it. Laya's parents stared at it longer than anyone else, as if it might offer an explanation if they looked hard enough. It didn't. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion set in. Flashlights dimmed. Voices grew hoarse. The fairgrounds, once loud and crowded, felt abandoned and wrong. Laya May Harrove had vanished without a sound, without a trace, surrounded by people who never realized they were witnessing the last moments of her freedom. As the sun threatened to rise, deputies began talking about expanding the search area, roads, fields, nearby properties. The word missing started to shift into something heavier, something no one wanted to say out loud. Laya's mother sat on the tailgate of a truck, staring at the dirt beneath her feet. Her father stood beside her, silent now, the frantic energy gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. The fair was over. The lights were off. And somewhere beyond the empty grounds, whatever had taken Laya was already far ahead of the search that was only just beginning. The morning after the fair arrived without relief. The sun rose over the same patch of dirt and grass, where laughter had echoed just hours earlier, but the place felt stripped of meaning. The fairgrounds were quiet now, cordoned off with tape, tire tracks frozen in the soil. By daylight, the scale of what had happened became harder to ignore. A 7-year-old child had vanished in a space small enough to walk across in minutes, and there was still nothing to point to where she had gone. The search expanded immediately. Sheriff's deputies coordinated with Texas Rangers, volunteer firefighters, church members, and anyone willing to help. Pickup trucks lined the gravel roads. People arrived with boots, water jugs, and a grim determination that pushed aside exhaustion. Search areas were mapped out by hand, marked with pens and folded paper. Groups were assigned fields, drainage ditches, tree lines, and abandoned structures within a widening radius of the fairgrounds. The first day focused on proximity. If Laya had wandered, if she had been frightened and run, she couldn't have gone far on her own. Teams walked shoulder to shoulder through tall grass, eyes fixed on the ground for any sign of a small footprint or a scrap of fabric. They checked culverts where rainwater collected, crawled into old sheds that smelled of rust and oil, and waded through shallow creeks, pushing sticks through muddy banks. Nothing turned up, not a shoe, not a ribbon, not a footprint that could be separated from the thousands already pressed into the earth. K9 units returned mid-morning, retracing the same path from the night before. The dogs worked methodically, noses low, tails stiff, pulling forward with confidence until they reached the gravel road again. And again, the trail vanished. Handlers tried from different angles, different scent items. Each attempt ended the same way. The dogs circled, confused, then stopped. For investigators, it reinforced what they had already begun to suspect. If Laya had been taken, it was likely deliberate, and it was likely fast. Investigators began reconstructing the fair minute by minute. Deputies sat at folding tables, taking statements from anyone who had been near the livestock barns. Everything was written down by hand. Names, times, descriptions that blurred together as the hours wore on. There was no centralized database, no instant cross-checking. Security footage existed, but it was limited. A single camera near the entrance recorded grainy black and white images too far away to capture faces clearly. Hours of tape were reviewed, rewound, and reviewed again. Children moved in and out of frame. Adults passed carrying bags and drinks. Nothing stood out. By the second day, the theory of an opportunistic abduction gained traction. The layout of the fairgrounds mattered. Whoever took Laya would have needed to know where the lights faded, where supervision thinned, where a child could be separated without causing immediate alarm. That suggested someone familiar with the fair, someone local, or someone who had been there before. Investigators compiled lists: fair volunteers, vendors, ride operators, maintenance workers, anyone who had access to the barns or had been seen lingering nearby. A registered offender list was pulled, printed and checked line by line. Deputies knocked on doors, asked routine questions, noted reactions. None of the known offenders could be placed at the fair that night. Alibis were checked and rechecked. Some were shaky, but none broke. The process was slow and deeply unsatisfying. Every door that closed without answers felt heavier than the last. Tips began pouring in. The phone rang constantly. People reported white vans idling near the parking lot. Strangers asking for directions, carnival workers who seemed nervous. Each tip sparked a brief surge of urgency, then collapsed under scrutiny. The white van had belonged to a family packing up early. The stranger asking for directions was a lost vendor. The nervous worker had simply been drunk. Leads dissolved as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind frustration and a growing sense of helplessness. By the third day, the tone of the search shifted, though no one said it out loud. The search radius expanded dramatically. Helicopters were requested, but limited by budget and availability. Volunteers thinned as people returned to work and families. The remaining searchers moved slower now, fatigue setting into their legs and voices. The focus subtly changed from finding a lost child to finding any sign of what had happened to her. Laya's parents refused to accept that shift. They were everywhere, watching, asking questions, clinging to each new lead as if it were a lifeline. Her mother slept in short bursts in the passenger seat of a truck, waking at every radio call. Her father joined search parties despite being told to rest, his eyes scanning the ground with an intensity that never softened. To them, Laya was not a case or a statistic. She was still alive until proven otherwise. Investigators faced the limitations of the time at every turn. There were no cell phone records to analyze, no GPS data, no digital trail. Everything depended on memory, and memory was unreliable, especially under stress. Witness timelines conflicted. One person's 5 minutes was another's 15. A child seen alone could easily become a child seen with an adult, depending on who was remembering. As daylight faded on the third day, command meetings grew quieter. The maps on the hood of the sheriff's truck were filled with markings, but none led anywhere meaningful. The possibility that Laya had been taken far beyond the search area became harder to ignore. If that was true, the chances of finding her alive diminished with every passing hour. Still, the search did not stop. It couldn't. Deputies continued knocking on doors, asking residents if they'd seen anything unusual that night. Most said no. Some said they wished they had paid closer attention. A few cried openly, haunted by the idea that they might have missed something important. By the end of the 72nd hour, the fairgrounds were quiet again, left to the insects and the wind. The tape came down. The trucks pulled away. What remained was an absence that no amount of searching could fill. Official language began to change. Press briefings spoke carefully, avoiding conclusions while preparing the public for the reality that the initial search had failed. For Laya's parents, time stopped moving forward. Each unanswered question hardened into something painful and permanent. They refused to leave town, refused to believe that their daughter could simply disappear without leaving a trace. Somewhere they believed there had to be a mistake, a missed clue, a detail overlooked in the chaos of those first hours. As the search transitioned into an investigation, the case settled into a silence that felt unnatural. Laya May Harrove had vanished without footprints, without evidence, without explanation. And as the days stretched into weeks, one unsettling truth began to take shape. Whoever had taken her had not been careless. They had known exactly how to disappear with her, leaving behind nothing but questions that would only grow louder with time. Time did not heal the town. It changed it. In the months after Laya May Harrove disappeared, the fairgrounds returned to their usual purpose. But the sense of safety never did. People still gathered for auctions and weekend events, but they watched each other differently now. Conversations lowered when someone unfamiliar walked by. Parents counted heads more often. Doors were locked earlier at night. The question no one could answer lingered over everything. If a child could vanish once, what stopped it from happening again? With no physical evidence to anchor the investigation, the case began to fracture into theories. Investigators followed each one carefully because they had no choice. The first theory centered on the carnival itself. Traveling workers came and went with little documentation. Some stayed only a night or two. Deputies tracked down ride operators and game attendants who had left town after the fair, crossing county lines, sometimes state lines, chasing seasonal work. Interviews were conducted over phone calls and handwritten letters. Alibis were thin, but unprovable. Nothing placed any of them with Laya in those crucial minutes near the livestock barns. Another theory pointed inward, a non-custodial relative, someone with access, someone who knew Laya well enough to coax her away quietly. Investigators revisited family members again and again, asking the same questions in different ways, looking for cracks. Each interview strained relationships that were already fragile with grief. No one wanted to be suspected. No one could be fully cleared either. Every family gathering became tense, heavy with things left unsaid. The most unsettling theory was the simplest: a predator passing through, someone who saw an opportunity and took it. That idea terrified the town because it offered no boundaries. If the person wasn't local, then there were no familiar faces to watch more closely, no known routines to question. It meant Laya could have been taken by someone who vanished as easily as she had. As theories multiplied, rumors filled the gaps left by facts. A quiet town does not tolerate uncertainty well. People talked, names were whispered. Innocent behavior was reinterpreted through the lens of fear. A man who lived alone near the fairgrounds became a topic of conversation because he kept to himself. Another, who owned a white van, stopped taking it to the grocery store after someone wrote his license plate number down. One accusation went further than the others. A local handyman known for drinking too much and talking too loud was rumored to have been seen near the barns that night. The story grew with each retelling. By the time deputies addressed it, the man had already been confronted by townspeople who believed they were protecting their own. He was beaten badly enough to require hospitalization. Investigators found nothing tying him to Laya. No evidence, no timeline, no motive beyond gossip. By the time he was cleared, the damage was done. He moved away not long after. Another life altered by a crime he did not commit. Detectives continued their work quietly, methodically, even as public interest faded. Witnesses were revisited years after their first statements. People remembered things differently now. Details shifted. A woman who once said she saw a girl alone now believed she remembered an adult nearby. A man who thought he had seen Laya near the food trucks wasn't sure anymore. Investigators noted inconsistencies, but inconsistency alone wasn't proof. Memory, especially under stress, was unreliable. One lead seemed promising for a time. A man who ran a game booth near the livestock barns agreed to a polygraph examination. He failed. The results suggested deception when he was asked about his movements that night. For a brief moment, the investigation tightened around him. His background was scrutinized, his past relationships examined, his finances checked. Nothing connected him to Laya beyond proximity. Polygraphs were tools, not evidence. Without corroboration, the results meant little. He was released from suspicion, but the shadow lingered over him long after. The Fair Committee, once cooperative, began to withdraw. Lawyers were brought in. Requests for records were delayed or denied. Liability became a concern. What had started as a community tragedy slowly tangled itself in legal caution. Paperwork grew thicker. Answers grew thinner. As the years passed, evidence degraded. Tapes wore out. Notes yellowed. Leads that once felt urgent now felt distant. Their relevance dulled by time. The case file grew heavier, but not clearer. Eventually, it was labeled what no one wanted it to be: cold. For Laya's parents, cold was a word that meant nothing. Their lives remained suspended at the moment she disappeared. Her bedroom stayed exactly as it had been. Toys lined up on shelves, clothes folded in drawers she would never open again. Birthdays came and went quietly. A cake was bought once and never again. Holidays were endured, not celebrated. Hope did not vanish, but it changed shape, becoming something quieter and more painful. They attended every meeting, called every new detective assigned to the case, followed up on every rumor, no matter how thin. Years of waiting sharpened their grief into something enduring. They learned to live with questions instead of answers. The town moved on in visible ways. New families arrived, old ones left. Children who had been Laya's age when she disappeared grew up with only a vague memory of her name. A story told by parents who lowered their voices when they mentioned it. The case became part of local history, spoken about with the certainty that nothing new would ever come of it. And yet the file was never closed. It sat on shelves, transferred between offices, occasionally reopened when a tip came in from someone convinced they had remembered something important. Each time the outcome was the same: no proof, no resolution. 18 years passed this way. Long enough for a generation to grow up, long enough for silence to settle into routine, long enough for the truth, whatever it was, to stay hidden beneath layers of assumption and neglect. Until one quiet discovery made by chance rather than design forced the town to confront the possibility that the answers had never been far away at all. 18 years after Laya May Harrove vanished, the house on County Road 417 was sold the way most quiet rural properties were sold, without attention, without ceremony. Its longtime owner, Calvin Raw, had died alone in his sleep, his passing noted briefly in the local paper. He was remembered as a quiet handyman, the kind of man who fixed fences, patched roofs, and volunteered when help was needed. He had lived in that house for decades, less than 2 miles from the fairgrounds where Laya was last seen. Few people had ever been inside. The new owners planned to renovate. The house was old, built in stages with uneven floors and walls that didn't quite line up. Contractors began gutting sections room by room, peeling back drywall, pulling out cabinets, uncovering the kind of small, forgettable problems common in homes that had aged quietly. On the third day of work, one of them noticed something strange. A section of wall in the utility room sounded hollow in a way the others did not. At first, it seemed like nothing. Old houses had quirks. But when the drywall came down, it revealed framing that didn't match the original structure. A false wall behind it. A narrow doorway sealed shut, its edges reinforced and carefully concealed. There was no record of a basement in county files, no permits, no mention in the deed history. The contractors hesitated before opening it, unsettled by the effort that had gone into hiding it. When the doorway was forced open, the smell came first. Damp, stale, something old and wrong. The space beyond was small, barely more than a room, dug beneath the house and reinforced with concrete. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, long dead. The air felt heavy, unmoving. One of the men stepped inside and froze. Bolted to a wooden support beam were handcuffs, not decorative, not misplaced. They were small, child-sized, rusted with age, but unmistakable. Nearby, scattered across the dirt floor, were objects that did not belong underground. A faded, stuffed animal, pieces of plastic toys yellowed with time, a single child's shoe, its sole worn thin. The contractors backed out of the space and called the sheriff. When deputies arrived, the house was sealed immediately. Word spread fast, faster than anyone expected. By the end of the day, Texas Rangers were on scene. The utility room became a controlled access point. Evidence markers dotted the basement floor. Photographs were taken carefully, methodically. Nothing was touched without documentation. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the name Laya May Harrove resurfaced in official conversations with urgency instead of resignation. Investigators worked slowly. The basement was not large, but it was deliberate. The false wall had been designed to blend seamlessly with the rest of the room. The door had been reinforced from the inside. Soundproofing materials lined parts of the walls, crude but effective. Whoever built it had planned not just to hide something, but to keep it hidden long-term. Among the items collected was a piece of fabric found near the back corner of the room. Blue, thin, patterned in a way that felt disturbingly familiar. It was sent for analysis, along with the toys, the cuffs, and soil samples taken from beneath the concrete slab. Investigators noted disturbances in the flooring, a section that had been poured differently. Slight inconsistencies in depth and composition. When forensic teams broke through the slab, they found what remained of small bones fragmented and degraded by time and moisture. There was no complete skeleton. Years underground had taken their toll, but there was enough. The testing process was slow, careful, and quiet. Fiber analysis confirmed that the fabric matched the material used in Laya's dress, a style sold locally in the early 1990s. Soil samples were consistent with the earth found beneath the fairgrounds. And then came the DNA work. Mitochondrial DNA extracted from what little viable material remained, compared against samples provided by Laya's mother. The match was confirmed 18 years after she disappeared. Laya May Harrove had been found. Investigators reconstructed Calvin Rohr's life with a scrutiny he had never experienced. While alive, he had volunteered at the county fair every year, helping with setup and maintenance. He knew the layout intimately. He knew where supervision thinned, where children wandered. He had access. He had time. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, unremarkable. Someone who fixed things and kept to himself. Someone no one thought to question. The basement explained what the investigation never could. How Laya vanished without a trace. How no one heard her. How dogs lost her scent so abruptly. She hadn't wandered. She hadn't been taken far. She had been hidden beneath a house that stood in plain sight, a short walk from where she was last seen. When Laya's parents were informed, there was no relief. No sense of closure that people imagine comes with answers. There was shock. Grief reopened as raw as it had been the night she disappeared. And there was anger. 18 years of searching, of waiting, of hoping. While the truth had been buried so close to home. The town reacted with a mixture of horror and disbelief. People drove past the house on County Road 417, slowly staring at it as if it might look different now. Some remembered Calvin Rohr fixing a fence, helping with a fair booth, offering a quiet nod in passing. The realization settled in slowly and painfully. He had never left. He had lived among them the entire time. For investigators, the discovery reshaped everything. The cold case was no longer a mystery of disappearance. It was a crime scene delayed by nearly 2 decades. Every missed sign felt heavier now. Every overlooked detail sharper in hindsight. As evidence continued to be catalogued, one truth became impossible to ignore. Laya had not been lost to chance or distance. She had been taken deliberately, hidden carefully, and kept out of sight for years. The basement had done exactly what it was built to do. And as the full scope of what lay beneath that house began to surface, investigators realized the story was not finished yet. Because the question was no longer just how Laya disappeared. It was how a man could hide something so monstrous for so long without anyone ever truly seeing him. Once the basement was uncovered, the investigation stopped moving backward and began moving inward. Not toward new suspects, but toward a man everyone thought they already understood. Calvin Rohr had been dead less than a month when his name re-entered the public record. This time, tied permanently to a crime that had haunted the town for nearly 2 decades. Investigators approached his life the way they would any suspects, except this one could no longer answer questions, could no longer contradict what the evidence suggested. On paper, there was nothing alarming about him. No criminal record, no arrests, no restraining orders. He had lived alone in the same house on County Road 417 for years, paying his taxes on time, keeping his property neat. He worked odd jobs, fixed fences, repaired sheds, helped neighbors when asked. Every summer he volunteered at the county fair, arriving early to help set up stalls, hauling lumber, running extension cords. He was reliable, quiet, forgettable in a way that made people comfortable. Investigators began interviewing people who had known him best, starting with those who had seen him most often around children. Fair organizers remembered him as dependable, someone who never complained. Parents recalled him offering to watch booths while they stepped away, handing out sodas to kids who lingered nearby. At the time, it felt generous. Looking back, it felt invasive. Several adults remembered thinking he was harmless because he never raised his voice, never pushed boundaries in obvious ways. Familiarity had softened caution. Adults weren't the only ones questioned. Investigators spoke to people who had been children in the early 1990s, now grown, who remembered Calvin Rohr in fragments. Some recalled him offering drinks on hot days. Others remembered being invited to see tools or animals near the edge of the fairgrounds. None of them described anything overtly criminal, just moments that felt wrong in hindsight, moments dismissed at the time because nothing bad had happened to them. As the interviews continued, a pattern emerged. Rohr was always nearby, always present, rarely questioned. He blended into the background of community life so thoroughly that his presence stopped registering as something worth noticing. That invisibility was its own kind of access. The most disturbing revelations came not from the fair, but from the neighborhood around his house. Neighbors described hearing occasional noises over the years, thumps, scraping sounds. Sometimes faint crying, though no one said that word at the time. They told themselves it was animals trapped under the house, or pipes shifting, or the house settling the way old houses did. In rural areas, unexplained sounds weren't unusual. No one called the sheriff, no one knocked on his door. A former girlfriend came forward after the discovery, her voice shaking as she explained why she hadn't spoken sooner. She had dated Roar briefly in the late 1990s. He had been controlling in quiet ways, insisting on routines, avoiding certain topics. She recalled asking once about the basement, noticing the utility room layout didn't make sense. He shut the conversation down immediately, told her the space was off limits. She never pressed him. She broke things off not long after, unable to articulate why she felt uneasy, only that she did. Investigators returned to the basement with new eyes, examining wear patterns, the placement of objects, the condition of restraints. Forensic analysis suggested prolonged use. The handcuffs weren't decorative or symbolic. They had been used repeatedly. The toys found weren't random trash. They showed signs of handling over time. Some were repaired with tape. Others were arranged deliberately. The space had been occupied. The most painful conclusion came from timelines. Evidence suggested Laya had not died quickly. There were signs she had been held alive for an extended period, possibly months. The realization landed heavily on everyone involved. The search that ended after days, the years her parents waited. All that time, she had been close enough for help to have mattered, hidden beneath a house that neighbors drove past daily. Investigators struggled with the implications. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It was planned, sustained, hidden behind routine. Roar had continued to live his life openly, while concealing something unimaginable beneath his floor. He attended fairs, fixed fences, made small talk. The contrast between who he appeared to be and what he had done unsettled even seasoned detectives. The town reeled under the weight of it. People revisited memories, questioning their own judgment. How many times had they waved at him, thanked him, trusted him near their children? Guilt spread quietly, unspoken, but heavy. There was no satisfaction in knowing the truth, only the ache of realizing how easily it had been missed. Laya's parents were informed of each new finding with care, but nothing softened the impact. Learning that their daughter had likely survived the night she disappeared changed the shape of their grief. It introduced new questions more painful than the old ones. What if the search had gone differently? What if someone had listened to that strange noise, that uneasy feeling? There were no answers that could ease those thoughts. As investigators prepared their final reports, one fact stood out above all others. Calvin Roar had never fled. He had never drawn attention to himself. He had relied on the simplest and most effective disguise available to him: normalcy. In a town where people trusted familiarity over scrutiny, he had been invisible by design. The case moved toward closure, but resolution felt hollow. Justice could not be served in the way it should have been. The man responsible was already gone, taking his explanations with him. What remained was a record of failure and a truth exposed too late. And as officials prepared to formally close the investigation, one final step remained: to acknowledge what the basement had revealed, not just about one man, but about the silence that allowed him to remain unseen for so long. By the time the final forensic reports were completed, there was very little left to debate. The basement on County Road 417 had answered questions the investigation had carried for nearly 2 decades. What it revealed was not speculation or theory, but confirmation. Authorities determined that Laya May Harrove had died in that space beneath the house. The cause of death, narrowed through skeletal analysis and contextual evidence, pointed to prolonged captivity followed by fatal neglect. There were no signs of an accident, no indication she had been moved elsewhere. The conclusion was clear, and it was devastating. With that determination, the case reached its official end. Calvin Roar was named the sole suspect. his responsibility established beyond reasonable doubt through location, opportunity, forensic evidence, and the structure he had deliberately concealed. There would be no arrest, no trial, no sentencing. Justice in its traditional form had arrived too late. What remained was truth and the weight of what that truth carried. When investigators met with Laya's parents to explain the findings, there were no words that could soften the moment. They had lived for years inside uncertainty, imagining endless possibilities, some worse than others. Knowing the truth did not replace those years of waiting with peace. It replaced them with something heavier. Confirmation brought clarity, but clarity came with images they could never unsee and timelines they could never stop replaying. They learned that their daughter had not vanished into nothing. She had been held. She had survived the night she disappeared. She had been close enough for rescue to have been possible. That knowledge settled differently for each of them. For her mother, it brought a sharp, quiet grief that surfaced in moments of stillness. For her father, it brought anger that never fully dissipated. Anger not just at Raw, but at every missed chance, every ignored instinct, every closed door that might have led somewhere, if opened sooner. Authorities closed the case with a formal statement outlining the findings and acknowledging the failures inherent in the passage of time. They spoke carefully, aware that the resolution did not feel like a victory. The announcement rippled through the town, reopening wounds people thought had scarred over. Some felt relief that the questions were answered. Others felt shame. Many felt both. The house on County Road 417 was boarded up, its future uncertain. People avoided driving past it when they could. When they did, they looked away. It no longer blended into the landscape. It stood as proof of something people didn't want to admit. That the danger they feared had not come from outside. It had lived among them, tolerated by familiarity, shielded by assumptions. The cost of silence. In the aftermath, the town was forced to conduct a painful audit of its own memory. Conversations shifted from speculation to confession. Neighbors began to speak openly about the red flags they had lowered, the scraping sounds attributed to settling foundations. The unease dismissed as paranoia, the erratic behaviors rationalized away in the name of privacy. The community had to swallow a bitter pill. Their silence had not been neutral. It had acted as a shield, protecting not the child, but the man who stole her. A modest stone memorial now sits near the edge of the fairgrounds, marking the years stolen from Laya May Harrove. It stands in the shadow of the rides that still return every summer. The lights still flicker, and the music still plays, but the psychology of the crowd has fundamentally changed. Parents hold hands a little tighter. Volunteers scan the perimeter with a sharper gaze. In this town, trust is no longer a default setting given to the familiar. It is a currency that must be earned. For the investigators, the basement on County Road 417 was more than a crime scene. It was a physical manifesto on the nature of evil. It proved that monsters do not always hide in the dark. Often, they stand in the center of the frame, camouflaged by their own normalcy, waiting for us to look away. Laya's parents never sought the spotlight, and they did not turn their grief into a public spectacle. They simply lived with the truth they had fought 20 years to uncover. The discovery did not bring closure, a word that implies a wound has healed, but it brought finality. It drew a thick, permanent line under the ambiguity that had defined their lives. Laya was found. The silence was broken. The silence, and while the mystery is resolved, the lesson remains. The most dangerous threat is often the one we have grown comfortable living beside. This case forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that proximity does not equal safety, and that the fatal interval can happen anywhere, even under the watchful eyes of a close-knit community. If you found this case analysis valuable, please consider liking the video and subscribing to Signal 49. We are dedicated to examining the strategy, psychology, and timelines behind the world's most complex true crime mysteries. I'm interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe modern technology has made predatory camouflage harder to maintain? Or have predators simply adapted to new methods of hiding in plain sight? For more deep dives into cases that changed how we investigate the missing, click the video on your screen now. I'll see you there.